Alright, so I did my presentation on prompting. Quick introduction to prompting. So, identifying prompting procedures with children who've been diagnosed with autism can assist in their development. Embedded in teaching these children is offering a prompt to ensure that the learner is making the correct response that is applicable to the situation. So, prompting can be used during discrete child training, natural environment teaching, pivotal response training, and social interactions. And there are many different prompting strategies, including simultaneous prompting, progressive time delay, no prompt, constant time delay, flexible prompt fading, most to least, and least to most prompting. I contemplated about doing my presentation this week on different types of prompting, but that's a lot of information to take in and to research, so I figured I would just stick to two types of prompting. So this article decided to compare flexible prompt fading versus a constant time delay prompt. So a constant time delay prompt ensures that the learner will always respond correctly using a controlling prompt. So the layout of it would be there's a target stimulus followed with a discriminative stimulus and a controlling prompt, which are delivered simultaneously, so without a time delay. There, after a specific number of prompted trials, the time interval between the discriminative stimulus and prompt is lengthened to typically about 4 seconds. And this remains until the response or a specific response criterion is met. So controlling prompt, what it is, it uses a least intrusive prompt type that guarantees response success. In this article, both prompted and unprompted responses resulted in reinforcement with the assumption that if the learner does not know the correct response, then they will wait for the teacher to provide the prompt. If the learner makes a correct response before the prompt is given, so in that 4 seconds that they've waited, reinforcement is given at a faster rate than if they waited for the prompt. Incorrect responses can be followed with either verbal feedback no, removal of the stimulus assistance, a short NC timeout, a reminder to wait, or a combination of all of these responses. Other researchers have determined that when comparing constant time delay prompt and progressive time delay, the constant time delay was more efficient in the terms of instructional time that was needed, as well as the number of sessions required for a learner to learn the response. Constant time delay was also more efficient when compared to least to most prompting. When it was compared to simultaneous prompting, minimal differences were seen between the two, but constant time delay prompt resulted in better generalization. Flexible prompt fading is when the prompts are gradually removed from most intrusive assistance to the least intrusive assistance. So this is really similar to most to least prompting, but it's different because of these reasons. So decreasing the prompt trials were not fixed, but based on teacher judgment, depending about whether or not the student is ready to receive the less assistance with a response. There are specific parameters with this that need to be met, even though the prompt fading is to the teacher's discretion. So teachers should always keep the learner at high levels of success, which is 80%, and should always err on the side of more prompting if the learner does not understand the basics of the tasks presented. There is greater flexibility in which the prompts can be faded. So this can be done through decreasing the intensity, changing the position, decreasing the frequency of the prompt, or changing the prompt type. Probe trials or test trials were given periodically to assess the learner's ability to the target discriminative stimulus. And prompts can be given prior, simultaneously, or immediately after the discriminative stimulus or after a short time delay. So the methods. They looked at 5 elementary aged students that were diagnosed with autism. Each of them were receiving a minimum of 10 hours of intensive behavioral intervention per week. They had to meet 6 prerequisites to be included in the study, and they were to be able to participate in typical classroom activities for up to 20 minutes with minimal off-task behavior. They had to be able to follow simple instructions. They had to have had experience with the token economy and be able to increase correct responding based on being reinforced by a token economy. So the token economy had to have been effective. Be able to match identical stimuli targeted for instruction. They had to be able to verbally imitate spoken words within 5 seconds of the instructor's model. And they had to be able to wait for 5 seconds for a response prompt that was provided by the instructor. And this piece is crucial to the constant time delay prompt, as they have to wait for the prompt. This was held during an 8-week classroom-based summer program located at an ABA Autism Treatment Center. So the classroom was designed to mimic a typical early elementary school classroom. The individual sessions occurred in a small room that was furnished with a table, 2 chairs, and cabinets with toys and activities. 16 unknown targets were determined for each participant. So this was done before the initial baseline, and 2 to 6 items were placed on the table, and the instructor asked them to touch an item. So during this time, both incorrect and correct responses resulted in a verbal praise, and if the specific item received a 33% of response success rate or lower, then this was used for that participant's target item to be taught during the trials. Controlling prompts were also determined for each participant. So this was done via a 25 trial prompt assessment. So the participant was given a field of 4 white index cards, each of them with a different colored border. So the sequence consisted of providing the learner with an instruction immediately followed by a prompt. So the 5 prompts that were being tested during this was a physical prompt, which is hand-over-hand assistance to guide the learner to the correct stimulus that was being asked of, a gesture prompt, which is the teacher pointing to the correct stimulus, a 2D prompt, which is the teacher holding up a identical matching stimulus to the target. A positional prompt is placing the target stimulus closer to the student, and the reduction of the field is the teacher decreasing the amount of white index cards that were placed on the table in front of the student. So then also weighting prompt criteria was determined. So this was done through a series of pre-training sessions that were designed to teach them that waiting for a prompt when they didn't know the correct response resulted in reinforcement. Some of their instructional procedures. So 16 targeted stimuli for each participant was identified. And then for each participant, those 16 stimuli were divided into a flexible prompt fading condition and then a constant time delay condition. The prompting procedures each received 20 total trials per session. So the targeted stimuli were introduced in pairs, with 2 distractor stimuli resulting in a field or an array of 4 stimuli that was presented. So the intervention was stopped if the participant received global mastery percentage of a 90% success rate or above for 2 consecutive probe conditions, or if the end of the 8-week summer program, whichever one came first, was when the intervention stopped. So global mastery is defined as the total number of correct responses that the participant made for all targeted stimuli in the probe condition. The participants were also assessed on their individual mastery, which is the participant being able to respond with 100% accuracy for any one of their target skills across 2 different probe sessions. So the probe sessions occurred before the intervention to gather baseline, and then after every 3rd instructional setting, and this was used to identify individual and global mastery. So this was done through the instructional procedures were done with 2 24 trial sessions. This was done back to back, and they alternated between the flexible prompt fading and the constant time delay. The reinforcement was using a token economy. In their case, it was in the form of tickets, and they were given every other trial regardless of accuracy of responding. So for their reinforcement, like I said, it was a token economy in the form of tickets, which could then be redeemed for tangible items. So 1 ticket was earned for prompted correct responses. 2 tickets were earned for non-prompted correct responses, and then incorrect responses resulted in simply going on to the next trial. The results were as follows. So flexible prompt fading required fewer trials to meet global mastery criteria. Constant time delay required less teaching time to reach global mastery. But overall, the flexible prompt fading was more effective and efficient than the constant time delay on global mastery and individual mastery, which implies that the flexible prompt fading might just be as effective and efficient as constant time delay for teaching students or children with ASD. So for some implications for practice, why teachers may choose flexible prompt fading over constant time delay. So constant time delay required the learner to wait for a prompt, and waiting can be a challenge for some children, which then may lead to the child to be unsuccessful. Additional time that it may take for the learner to learn to wait for a prompt could eventually make constant time delay less efficient. And then the types of prompts for each condition that were needed. So constant time delay prompt procedure required 1 controlling prompt, where during the flexible prompt fading, the teacher can vary the prompt, sometimes using only 1 specific type of prompt may make the learner prompt dependent, and then they also might have difficulties generalizing the skill to other teachers. So, limitations. There were a few limitations identified in this study, so no procedural data was collected on the program implementation. The target response was a one-step receptive response, meaning the effectiveness of flexible prompt fading is unknown in other skill areas, such as chained responses of tying your shoes or washing your hands, or non-receptive programs. All of the children in the study had previous history with being taught with flexible prompt fading, and all of the children had no history with constant time delay, which could account for the data results in this study. Teaching the instructors on flexible prompt fading procedures as well as discrete trial training took extensive training and time in order to effectively implement the programs. So for this article, I searched it through simply going into a Rare Campus Library website, Google searched, looked at abstracts, read them through, trying to figure out which ones met my criteria. And I came upon this one, which I thought the research design was pretty applicable to this assignment. So this article had a decent sample size. It was still 5 students, but with a single subject experimental design that this was, I think this was a decent size. It was nice that each participant received the same intervention, and so this was a single subject experimental design with an embedded parallel treatment design, which controls the effects of extraneous variables through counterbalancing. Their dependent variable and their independent variables were very clear and concise, so the prompt strategies that were used were independent. And then the responses, which is the dependent variable, and then also inter-observer agreements were used during this, and this was scored during the in vivo session. So overall, I thought the article was really great, and I thought it was really applicable to prompting, and I learned quite a bit on prompting. I didn't know that there was a prompting procedure for constant time delay. I mostly use most to least prompting in certain situations, and then least to most prompting. Those are the main 2 that I use, and then we kind of fade our prompts. So the prompting strategy that I'm probably more keen on or familiar with is the flexible prompt fading procedure. So it was kind of interesting to read about the constant time delay procedure. And here are my references. Thanks.